Fresh talk to him.
This is Spec Weekly. I'm Cutcraft, delivering your dose of IOTA hopium. Join me as we take a look at what happened last week.
Read the disclaimer, baby.
Let's go. TangleCon was a virtual event that happened in May. It featured a number of speakers from the IOTA ecosystem, and I'm going to do some commentary on a couple of these talks, starting with Dom's presentation about the evolution of IOTA. They say you can't really know where you are going until you know where you have been. Dom starts by talking us through the early day concepts, where the vision started with two hypotheses. One, that IOTA would become the trust layer for the Internet of Things, and two, that IOTA would create its own technology to bring blockchain to the real world. IOTA was incubated in 2015, where the early focus was on the machine economy. While in spite of the wrong decisions and missteps they've taken, the foundation was able to fight and survive through the process of development. Dom mentions that the core team the IOTA Foundation pulled together is their biggest asset, as well as the community. And the early days were about getting the Tangle up and running and establishing the groundwork for their vision.
IOTA was founded in 2015, so very early. It's now 8 years that we've been doing IOTA, so it's a long time. In 8 years in crypto, it really can feel like decades in the real world, because the crypto world just moves so fast and things just change constantly. Focus initially was on the machine economy, was on getting the Tangle ready. But as you move along, operating in a crypto world is really this very extreme roller coaster where you have these extreme ups and the extreme downs. And the most important thing is that you survive it.
The years of IOTA's maturity came through 2018 to 2021, with the biggest step being the Chrysalis upgrade, where they completely rebuilt IOTA the way it should have been from the start. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there was a lot of technical debt as it was being built in Ternary. Thank goodness we've moved on. And I want to illustrate an example of what it was like in the days before Chrysalis. We used to have something called Winternit's one-time signatures. It's a quantum-resistant security scheme. The downside to it is that every time you send tokens from your address, the remaining tokens you didn't send would need to be moved to another address. This means you couldn't have a static deposit address for your wallet. Imagine the scenarios where this would become a pain in the ass, where a developer is trying to create something automated but had to deal with addresses that constantly change. Thankfully, we now have a reusable deposit address, and this was made possible by the Chrysalis update. Chrysalis is important because it was a completely new architecture, and it laid the foundation for the Stardust implementation. With Stardust, we got two massive functional additions that will bring the IOTA protocol up to speed with the rest of the market. It introduced the tokenization framework that enables us to mint tokens on the layer 1, as well as NFTs, and send them to any layer 2 dApps that are developed. And we also got smart contract integration, allowing us to commit layer 2 smart contracts to the mainnet ledger. So we're growing up.
The start of all of that was really the Chrysalis upgrade that happened in, I think, early 2021. And it obviously took a long time to sort of reinvent the protocol, because we had to remove all of the bad and really focus on the core, which was the DAG architecture. And then basically build IOTA as it should have been from the start, right? Really fast transactions, reusable addresses, and very important, a new ledger architecture where you can actually issue tokens on the layer 1, where you can also do smart contracts.
Now brace yourselves for some painful truth. Well, from my perspective anyway. I think the biggest miscalculation in IOTA's history, and I say this with the benefit of hindsight, was distancing the project from the rest of the crypto market and focusing exclusively on real-world use cases through commercial and government adoption. It sounded good and it made sense at the time, as proof of concepts and meaningful partnerships were being announced. But we've come to realize that real-world adoption is slow. And on the level of corporate risk and financial regulation, it's become clear that mandating token use is near impossible. What I'm trying to say is, you can't really force the use of the IOTA token in these use cases. So back then, with IOTA doing its own thing outside of crypto, it means we did not go along with the direction the rest of crypto was taking. And unfortunately, not pushing into the DeFi, NFT, and GameFi markets has pushed our project into the shadows. I'm talking missing the mark on both the levels of technical approach and market relevancy. And we see that today, reflected in IOTA's rank and market capitalization. More on that with an example, and I'll use the main building block of programmable money in mainstream crypto. I'm talking specifically about smart contract functionality and EVM compatibility. These core tenets for pretty much all successful crypto projects were not on IOTA's roadmap for a very long time. We were going to implement a very specific IOTA technology called Cubic. It was a distributed computing technology that had similar utility to smart contracts, but I don't think my PTSD will let me talk too much more about that. But it's a good example of how the IOTA ecosystem was on its own island, while the other projects were aligning to what Ethereum was doing. However, as I mentioned before, we're now on the right path to maturity. The ecosystem is gearing up to become players again, with Shimmer's implementation of Chrysalis and Stardust kicking things off.
I can say quite honestly, right? Like IOTA wasn't part of the crypto market for the last few years. Like we didn't participate in the NFT, in the DeFi, in the GameFi boom. And we didn't do that because we had a different focus. We had a different set of use cases. We were really working on enterprise, and we weren't working on anything crypto related because we had a different target audience, right? And we had a different market. And so over the last 2 years, we've sort of been rebuilding IOTA at the core, making sure that the protocol is usable, that there's real utility, that there's real programmability, right? So that you can really build applications on top of IOTA. And now our core focus is to take the good parts of IOTA and start reimagining them and be relevant in the crypto market as well. And that is obviously where Shimmer is core to our strategy.
In a nutshell, IOTA is being positioned as a settlement layer. In other words, we'll look at IOTA as a network that provides a trusted and secure platform for anyone to build on top, trusting that all the data and assets with value can transact safely and efficiently throughout the entire ecosystem and potentially externally through trusted bridges.
To the crypto market, right? Like it's kind of obvious that at this point, our ambitions are to catch up with the competition because they're obviously ahead of us when it comes to the crypto adoption, but we're also catching up in our own way. We're not doing this to be number 5 in CoinMarketCap rankings. We are doing this really to achieve our vision with IOTA, and the market cap rankings and the price will follow that. Right? And there's obviously 2 distinct buckets that we have to think about, 2 distinct categories. Right? The one is the technology, where we need to make sure that we have a very competitive ledger architecture where we really position IOTA as a viable trust layer, right? As a settlement layer for layer 2 networks, but also really for assets. And I think we are definitely in a unique position where we can compare ourselves to other ledgers, where we can become one of the major layer 1s. And the most important thing is that you really have a settlement layer, right? The layer 1 that has enough network effects, that has enough credibility to be a trust layer to anchor to, right? And that is really how we are positioning IOTA, because we are one of the oldest projects. We are one of the brands that sort of everybody knows. And now with the IOTA 2.0 upgrade, we really have a viable path to become a much better settlement layer than even blockchains.
A little more on that from Dom.
And we simply call this IOTA chains because fundamentally what we're doing is we're actually deploying blockchain networks on top of the layer 1 and then allow them to be secured and allow them to actually benefit from the security and the liquidity and the composability of the layer 1.
And I want to add a little more on that as well, because this concept gets me excited. What we're going to hear next is that IOTA's approach to becoming an anchor for layer 2 chains should ultimately benefit the layer 1, as I imagine, and pure speculation, that any time an asset is transferred between layer 2 chains, a fee will be paid in the native token or a derivative-like manner, regardless of any custom layer 2 gas mechanics.
IOTA is in the middle, right? We are essentially using our layer 1 as the bridge. And with some future upgrades, we really envision that these layer 2 networks will actually leverage the IOTA token and will leverage the layer 1 for its security as well, right? So we really have this very coherent network where the layer 2 networks are benefiting the layer 1, are benefiting the IOTA token because they're obviously using it for the shared security. And what's very exciting about our architecture, because of the tokenization framework and this concept of native assets, is that all of these networks here, they're able to seamlessly transfer assets between them, right? And this composability that is enabled through that is one of the very powerful features of IOTA, where we can scale liquidity and scale the network much better than other networks, because in other networks, the fragmentation is very clear, right? Where the layer 2 networks are sort of parasites of the layer 1.
We're going to see a renewed approach to adoption through the ecosystem. The IOTA Foundation will empower community projects to stimulate network activity. And while that happens, the long-term projects like the EBSI will continue to proceed towards implementation, and potentially, we could see IOTA become involved in a digital euro.
Previously, what we've done is we sort of did it the opposite way, right? Where we focus on these long-term projects, on those very high impact projects that take years to adopt, will potentially bring millions of transactions and millions of users and billions in assets to the network, but they're years away, right? So they take a long time to develop. So instead of just focusing on long-term projects, now we also need to position ourselves in the short term, right? To really become a competitive network for DeFi, for GameFi, for NFTs. But of course, we have to do them in our own unique way, but it's obvious that we need to have those as a foundation for our entire ecosystem to flourish, because before we can have more exotic ideas for liquidity, for new asset management tools, for new dApps that take tokenized assets and so on and so forth, before we can do all of that, we need to have a strong base, right? And the strong base is by having good decentralized exchanges, is to have good lending markets, is to have a lot of liquidity in the market, in the network. So we first need to build that foundation, and then we can jump on to the to bigger projects, right? So it's about having this dichotomy of focus on the long term, right? Doing real world asset tokenization, doing stablecoins, doing EPSI and trade finance and so on and so forth, while at the same time focusing on the short term, right? And ultimately, it's all about the ecosystem and the community that we're building. And that's really the most important thing right now, where it's no longer about the IOTA Foundation pushing forward the adoption, but it's really about our ecosystem pushing forward the adoption. So we have these projects that we have done with industry partners, and IOTA is very well known for them. So we're absolutely moving forward with them. I think we're doing it in a much more focused effort, where it's not about doing 1,000 different proof of concepts, but it's really about having a concentrated effort to just build those use cases with those partners where we believe that they have a viable path to adoption. Right? So we're obviously doing a lot on public goods and infrastructure with EPSI. There's also an amazing project called Energieknip, which making really good progress on global trade and supply chain, right? And then also doing things like real-world asset tokenization, right? Whether it's carbon emissions or whether it's real estate and other assets, right? I think all of those projects will are sort of mid to long term, right? I don't think any of us can expect them to show the results over the next 1 to 2 years, but they're basically long-term bets that we are making, that where we have an edge over other networks and where we can really set them up so we will have a lot more adoption coming onto the network as we move along, right? EPSI is one of those projects where we have a lot of hope and where we also are very excited for it, because obviously it is the premier blockchain procurement project in the EU right now, right? And IOTA is one of the 3 finalists. And building out the blockchain infrastructure for the European Union is obviously a very huge thing, right? Because no other layer 1 DLT is part of this pre-commercial procurement process. So the objective is obviously that with IOTA we're going to win this tender and then really scale this up into other countries as well. So it's a very exciting project, and we're very proud to be part of it. Obviously, the digital euro is something that's also on top of our agenda right now, to think about how IOTA can be a player in that. And it's obviously a separate effort to EPSI, but at the foundation, we're definitely thinking about how we can also participate in things like the digital euro.
I'm super excited to see the tokenomics white paper. I really like the sound of what Dom is saying here, and I don't have too much more to add.
An important part of all of this is obviously also our tokenomics. So all of this is part of IOTA 2.0 then, where we are improving the tokenomics of IOTA significantly, where there is going to be a form of staking, right? Where you stake your IOTA tokens to secure the network. And in turn, instead of getting IOTA tokens, you get mana, right? And mana is this throughput access to the network, and you can then also sell them, i.e. monetize them, right? So the beauty of the system is that there's no inflation on the IOTA token. So it's a very sustainable, sort of circular economic model to do our tokenomics. And this dual token model holds the promise that we are able to have a network and an ecosystem that is much more aligned, where the incentives are much more aligned between all the network participants. So I think mana will be an important part for our future, to really give utility to IOTA, to make sure that IOTA has staking, that you have certain economic value that you get in return for securing the network. And in addition to that, that IOTA itself really becomes this store value, right? Where it becomes the asset that is securing the layer 1 and this asset that is securing the layer 2. Without actually having any inflation, right? So you can think about IOTA in the future like digital real estate, right? And you're monetizing it, i.e. by renting out mana.
Shimmer plays an important role in kickstarting the ecosystem. It's the incentivized network that will receive all the upgrades before IOTA, to make sure IOTA stays safe while breaking changes are fully tested with a token that has real-world value. Personally, I think that Shimmer will develop into its own ecosystem. I have a feeling that the lead it gets with smart contracts and tokenization means that DeFi will become more embedded on Shimmer than it does on IOTA. Sure, it will be super easy for projects to port their dApps to IOTA when it's ready, but if they have something up and running for over a year on Shimmer, I just wonder what their incentive will be to move things to IOTA. And I could be wrong, but I see IOTA more as the institutional brand, EBSI, Trademark Africa, and the trade apps that might be coming for the UAE. Massive long-term projects on IOTA, short-term quick wins on Shimmer. Time will tell.
Right, and Shimmer is an important part of our strategy, because Shimmer is, unlike IOTA, Shimmer is a new brand, right? It's a new token. It is also building and attracting new users into it, because it is a little bit more degen. It is a little different, or is very different than IOTA, because IOTA is more this established brand focused on enterprise and corporates. And with Shimmer, we can really build up a very thriving and successful DeFi ecosystem. So I'm personally very excited about Shimmer, and I would say that obviously the major focus right now is on making sure that Shimmer and the Shimmer EVM becomes a huge success, because afterwards we can basically replicate this success on IOTA as well, because then IOTA will get the same upgrade, and the same dApps that have already been established on Shimmer will also be able to thrive on IOTA. In terms of the roadmap, right? So right now we have the Shimmer EVM, where we have launched a testnet, and where the focus is obviously on launching this as soon as possible on the mainnet. So things are obviously progressing there, and so the more testing and the more participation that is happening there, the faster we can get this to mainnet. After that, we will launch the starters upgrade on IOTA. So that will include smart contracts, that will include tokenization. And then at the same time, we're starting the upgrade of Shimmer to IOTA 2.0, right? So you don't have to worry about the EVM. The EVM is the layer 2. What we're actually replacing is the layer 1, so that the layer 1 isn't going to run on a coordinator anymore, but the layer 1 is going to progressively run with IOTA 2.0. So we'll obviously share all of the details on how that upgrade is going to happen in the near future. And then after that, obviously the same upgrade will happen on IOTA. Then we have a very competitive and very unique layer 1. We have on the layer 2 this possibility to deploy smart contract chains, right? And then after that, obviously we have a whole roadmap of other upgrades that we want to work on, like the ZK EVM, like different forms of smart contracts, and obviously staking on the layer 1.
Okay, to summarize, next cab off the rank is launching the Shimmer EVM on the Shimmer mainnet. The Shimmer EVM testnet has just been reset last week, and I think we'll see some months of testing. And with Europeans taking summer holidays around August, I wouldn't expect to see the Shimmer EVM on the mainnet before September, possibly even October. After the Shimmer EVM is on the Shimmer mainnet, we'll see two things done at the same time. Chrysalis will be implemented onto the IOTA mainnet, which will give IOTA NFTs and tokenizations, so we can see shitcoins on IOTA's layer 1, and it will give IOTA smart contract capability. So while that happens, and this is the exciting bit, Shimmer will begin to receive the IOTA 2.0 upgrades, meaning the slow transition to Coordicide will begin. Where hopefully, if you guys could see me, I got both my fingers crossed, we see it implemented on the Shimmer mainnet by the end of 2024, which after a lot of thorough testing, we'll see Coordicide deployed on the IOTA mainnet. So somewhere probably around 2025, I'd say. But the IOTA Foundation won't stop there after Coordicide. So Coordicide we all think is the end game, but there still are some more upgrades in the pipeline, like Layer 1 smart contracts and ZK rollups. We're getting closer, my brothers. We're almost there. And honestly, I hope the bull run doesn't kick off until we're ready. It's encouraging to see that Dom is well aware of our position and that the Foundation is setting IOTA up to capitalize on the next boom by making it modular and composable so that we can move to what the market is doing. We haven't seen the end of crypto. We're right at the beginning.
And where Apple was in sort of like this inferior position where they were sort of like a niche product, right? And the network effects and the growth of all the competitors, especially Windows and Intel, was too strong for them to compete in this market. And what Steve Jobs said in the end is he's going to wait for the next big thing, right? And with IOTA, we're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to build a very strong foundation right now. We're going to build a very strong technology, a very strong ecosystem. And with that foundation, we're going to prepare ourselves for the next big thing so that we can really capture the value of what is coming next. And so that we are going to make smarter decisions than our competitors. So that we are going to move faster, be more agile, more adaptive. And that we're also going to grow faster than our competitors. And ultimately, as long as we are mission driven and we're guided by a strong vision, I think everything else will fall into place.
Now I know things feel kind of quiet right now, and the IOTA Foundation isn't releasing too much on an official level. We're not seeing many blogs, we're not seeing many updates. But if you take a look at channels like the IOTA Core channel, you can see there's a lot of GitHub activity. And recently Jonas released an update, which was very well received by the community, and I would love to see these kinds of updates happen more often. It really lifts the morale of us non-technical people who are supporting from the sidelines and really do wish the best for the ecosystem. But On the same token, if we don't hear anything, then it can get us feeling down. And look, if you ever find yourself feeling down, all you have to do is remember $4 EOY. See you next time.